Hi folks, welcome to this video on calculating bond proceeds when the bond date and the issue date are different. In our case here, you can see that we have bonds that are issued at par value. Par value means there's no discount and there's no premium. So normally in that case, that means that the amount of cash that the issuer would receive from the investor is equal to the face value. In our case, 1.2 million. However, what makes that slightly different in our case is the fact that the investors didn't buy into the bond until February the 1st, 1 month after they were available for sale. So the investors are only going to be in the game or hold the Sienna bonds from February 1st to June 30th. That represents 5 months that the investors have the bond. The issue is that the investors are going to get paid by Sienna a full 6 months of interest. So the investors have to pay Sienna an extra amount for this 1 month here, the month of January, from January 1st to February 1st, because they've only held the bond for 5 months from February to June, but they're going to get a full 6 months interest. So what we need to do is we need to calculate how much over and above the face value of 1.2 million Sienna is going to get from its investors. So if we multiply it by the coupon, which is 5%, but that's an annual amount, we know that Sienna has to pay, or the investors have to pay Sienna for 1 month of 12, or 1 month, the month of January, interest. So 5%, which represents 12 months, or an annual rate, times 1 over 12 is going to give us an extra $5,000 that the investors have to give Sienna. So therefore, our debit to cash is going to be more than the face value. It's going to be $1,205,000. We're going to credit the bond payable at its face value of 1.2 million, but don't forget, this is the entry that Sienna makes on its books, and it's going to also include in that entry to balance it a credit to interest payable. Why? Because once June 30th rolls around, Sienna is going to pay the investors a full 6 months interest, which includes this $5,000. Because the investors are giving them this $5,000 up front, which is part of this 1.205 million, we have to record that $5,000 on Sienna's books as a payable because they're going to give it back to them at the end of 6 months. So now, when the first interest payment is made, which is 6 months down the road, June the 30th, we have to calculate two things. We have to calculate the amount of interest expense. The amount of interest expense, don't forget, interest does not start clicking in terms of interest expense until the bond is issued. So we have 5 months of interest expense to book. So interest expense is going to equal the face value times the coupon. But I'm saying the coupon because don't forget, when we have a par value bond, what does that mean? The coupon of 5% and the yield, we always use the yield to calculate interest expense. The coupon and the yield are the same. So 1.2 million times our yield, which happens to be the same as the coupon because we have a par value bond, times 5 months of 12. Don't forget, this 5% here is for 12 months. We only want to calculate interest expense for the period that the bond is outstanding with investors, which is from February to June, and that's going to be 5 months of 12. That's $25,000. So we're going to debit the interest expense. Expense always starts clicking once the bond is issued. The bond was issued February 1st, so we book interest expense from February 1st to June 30th, June 30th being the first interest payment date of $25,000. How much interest would Sienna be paying its investors? Well, we didn't do this calculation, but we know it would be 1.2 million times the coupon, right, times 6 over 12. And that amount would give us what? That amount is going to give us $30,000. So if we expense interest of $25,000 and we pay out $30,000, that means, again, this amount that Sienna took in and credited because it was like a prepayment from the investors of that $5,000 here, right? They're just paying that back. So in other words, this $30,000 that Sienna is paying back its investors includes the $5,000 that the investor gave them up front, which they set up as a payable because they knew on June 30th they were going to have to pay it back. So they debit or reduce the payable by $5,000, and they debit the balance, which is $25,000 for interest expense. So our entry here on Sienna's books would be to record interest expense over the 5-month period that the bond is outstanding, reduce the interest payable because now they are paying out the additional $5,000 that the investors paid to them when they issued the bond, and credit $30,000, which is the 6 months of interest that Sienna would pay to its investors on June the 30th. Even though they've only been in the game, the investors, for 5 months, they get a full 6 months interest, 5 months since the issue date, and the 1 month they paid up front. That totals your $30,000. So this concludes our video on bonds issued at a date different than the bond date.